We are very fortunate today to have another famous Arkansan as our speaker. I've known Gene McKissic now for 2 decades. I remember meeting him when I was an assistant professor in history. And I actually read about him, I think, before I met him. And he was the very first African-American student body president elected back in 1972. I still don't know how you pulled that one off, Gene. That was one of the great campaigns, had to have been in our ASG presidential history, because you simply didn't have, from a demographic numerical reality, the numbers of African-American students to vote you in alone. You had to build coalition. And so I'm really interested to hear you talk about that some. Gene has his own law firm in Pine Bluff, and he's a pillar of the community in Pine Bluff. And he's been very much connected to the university, even establishing his own endowed scholarship, with his name on it. So he's connected to the university as an alum. He has 2 degrees. You also have a law degree from here, don't you, Gene?
Correct.
I think it's 76. And he graduated from the university in 1974. So we're just all ears now. Gene, please share your story. I know you have some questions from the students, and they may have others for you. So,
okay. Well, as he said, I'm Gene McKissic. Born and raised in Pine Bluff. Been here all my life except for the 7 years I was in Fayetteville. And I want to jump off at what Charles raised about my getting elected as student body president. And what I want to say about that is, I believed in 1972 that I could win. I was very confident, and I did have coalition. Part of it was the year before I ran, or strike that, a couple of years before I ran, a gentleman whose name is Eddie Walker. He's a Black attorney who practices in Fort Smith. He was in the student senate, and he ran before I did. And he ran a very credible race. And so we had looked at that. Part of it was I had been involved in student government, first as a representative from my dorm, Yoakum Hall. I think there were 400 students in Yoakum Hall, 8 of which were Black. But I ran for residence hall representative and won big. And then in my sophomore year, that was during my freshman year, in my sophomore year, I ran for the student senate. And when I ran for the student senate, again, without, demographics in my favor, obviously, because we made up less than 1% totally. Number of Black students on campus was less than 100 at this time, or approximately, out of more than 9,000 students. But I again won that race and won it very handily. So I have always believed that while race is a fact, it is not always the overriding factor. And some of it is, what kind of team do you put together, and what kind of platform, how do you present? When Barack Obama ran, even though in the interest of full disclosure, I'm a Republican, I have been since 1972, when I was student body president. And the reason is, 2 of my very closest friends when I went to university, one of them was Jim Burnett from Clinton, Arkansas. who was a staunch Republican and who became, he was chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, and investigated the space shuttle disaster 30 years or so ago. And he was chairman at first, I think, under Reagan and then under Bush. And wonderful guy. He's now deceased. And his best friend was president of the student body before I was, and I was in the student senate working. Gary McDonald, who's a lawyer in Tulsa, and to this day is one of my dearest friends. So I spent a lot of time with those guys, and I was learning the ropes about politics, messaging, campaigning. And that summer I spent on campus with those guys, I learned a lot of nuts and bolts about how you put together a campaign. And in fact, I'm in no way bragging, I'm saying how much I believe that is. I thought Barack Obama could win, and I supported him not because he was Black, but frankly, I supported John McCain a lot. I was and am I'm a John McCain Republican in many ways. But anyway, back to the point, which is he ran the campaign the right way. And before he ran, we elected the first Black mayor in the history of Pine Bluff in 1974. And I, along with some other people, were the architects of that campaign and his reelection. So I do think I understand some things about politics, campaigning, messaging, how to get elected. And all I'm saying is we employed those things back then. And obviously it takes some building some relationships with people of goodwill. And I had a good team. David Matthews, who's an attorney in that area, very well known from Rogers, managed my campaign. And I had so much support on campus, off campus, and we ended up winning with 59% of the vote, running against a Greek candidate, which had always dominated. And so, I say all that to say, it really is about messaging. It's about relating. It's about planning. You can't do anything about the people who will never support you because of race. But you have to get beyond race to communicate with the constituency you're appealing to. And sometimes I think campaigns get so caught up in the race issue that they make it more prominent. And I've done the same thing with selecting juries. When you keep, I'm not talking about post-racial, I'm talking about strategy in general. When you bring 12 people into the box to select a jury to hear a particular case, whether it's civil or criminal, race is a fact. You do not have to make it a factor in that proceeding. And there is a difference. And when you make race a factor, as opposed to it's just a fact of who you are and who they are, then I think you highlight something that's not necessarily relevant. And I know people disagree with me on that because I've had those disagreements, but I've tried 6 cases by my count in my career in front of all white juries representing Black defendants and in serious charges from rape and murder, and never gotten a conviction. And so I believe, again, not bragging, and I don't think it's because I'm some superior lawyer or something. I just don't think you make anything that's not relevant to the proceeding before the court, you don't go there. And I think the same thing is true with politics. As to my experience overall at the university, when I arrived at the university in September of '69, we started out protesting. Being in Fayetteville was night and day from being in Pine Bluff and South Arkansas. In '69, Pine Bluff and South Arkansas was strictly segregated, especially socially. There was no social interaction or discourse between Black and white, and that's what we're talking about. And when you go to Fayetteville, all of a sudden, I'd never been in an overnight situation with someone of a different color. I had been at Pine Bluff High for 3 years, but under what was called then freedom of choice. I was in a segregated school, Black school, very good school in my opinion, at Merrill, which is a renowned school down here. A lot of great graduates from that school, great faculty, great principal. And under freedom of choice, a Black student could, for the first time, choose to attend a white school. And for those of you who read my interview, my parents took the position. It wasn't about going to a white school. That had nothing to do with it. I didn't want to go. My brother and I didn't want to go, and protested loudly. And back then, you did what your parents told you to do. And that's what we did. But their position was, the world you're going to live in as an adult will not be a segregated world. And you need to adjust right now to living in, and this is how far thinking they were. They told us, you're not only going to be competing against white and everybody in America, by the time you're an adult, you will be completing, the competition will be global. And obviously I didn't understand all of that. We didn't. We did what they told us. So I had spent 3 years at Pine Bluff High. And even though we were on the same campus, it was just segregation under the same rule. And in fact, you had both teachers who were helpful and a lot of teachers who were not, who made it obvious to you they did not want you there. But you did have some teachers who were encouraging and very fair. But when I got to Fayetteville, when I arrived in Fayetteville, the first thing I noticed was the faculty was there to teach. And I've said this, I don't know what was in their heart, but with only 2 exceptions, the faculty at the university was very fair. And I need to take just the first thing that happened, my first poli-sci class, which was one of the first classes I took, and that was my major. There was a professor whose name is Dr. Robert Munson. And he took us through an exercise. And the purpose of that exercise was to point out to us how conventional our thinking was, how much it was controlled by your parents and where you came from. And the light went on in my head at that point, at least, that I really was unsophisticated still may be, but really I didn't understand. And he made this statement after going through the exercise. He says, "You are now at the University of Arkansas. It is my job not to tell you what to think, but to teach you how to think." And he did a very good job of taking us through thought processes and looking at different issues from different angles and not being wedded to those positions solely on the basis of your own background. And then I had a professor named Kurt Torhauser who taught international politics. And he was the first person I'd ever heard in my life that really questioned America's role around the globe and the way we viewed ourselves. And he made us read The Ugly American. And then he talked about how the way Americans view themselves and their role around the world is not the same as the rest of the world views us, as heroic, always honorable, but to take a look at America from their perspective as being a very small percentage of the population, but consuming a very large percentage of the world's resources. So what I'm trying to say is that was a time of expansion of what was probably a very closed mind. When you add that to the times, let's look at these times. We have COVID going on. We have a whole new horizon of racial division that we're trying to again reconcile. We have a heated presidential race. But in the 60s, I mean, civil rights was on the front burner of virtually everything happening. Then you had the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was on everybody's mind because everybody was seeing body bags come home, caskets unloaded every day. Walter Cronkite would come on and say, "Today in Vietnam, the casualty report," and tell you how many Americans had died, how many were wounded. It was just like Ali jab. It was in your face constantly. You had the beginning of the feminist movement. That's what it was called then. You had the beginnings of the sexual revolution. So you had all of these big issues. I mean, you're talking about shortly after that, Roe versus Wade. You had the decision about prayer in schools. And atheism was being proselytized. And they were bringing all these speakers on all of these subjects to the university. And back then it wasn't some controversy. You know, the alums didn't want them, but the university administration brought them in. And they exposed us to a broad spectrum of ideas, of thoughts, of issues. And they brought Black speakers, white speakers, women, different. And a lot of students, particularly a lot of blacks, we were eating that stuff up, not believing it. But we didn't get exposed to a lot of that in our hometowns. Once I left a black school, there was no black history taught anywhere. So we were learning. And so as soon as I hit campus, the issue of Dixie, and I don't know where it originated, but BAD, Black Americans for Democracy, that was the student group that was formed. And basically, black students were invisible at the university. It was almost like we weren't there and we didn't matter. And so one of the things we decided was we weren't going to stay on that campus for 4 years and not be relevant. Nor were we going to stay on that campus for 4 years and be disrespected, our humanity. We have to go to a ball game and listen to Dixie. Watch the rebel flags flying. Hear the rebel yells. And I mention this because the first football game I played high school football. To this day, I'm a major football fan. To this day, I've had Razorback football tickets, basketball tickets for decades, have seen games all over the country, went to all the Final Fours Arkansas went to. So I'm more than just a casual fan. I'm a diehard Razorback fan. We go to the ball game, and it was ugly. The students didn't want us there. We're sitting in the student section, and they're calling us all of the vile names that whites call black people. They're pelting us with ice, with cups. They would throw gum down at the black women, and it would stick in their hair. And if you know anything about a black woman, you don't fool with her hair without permission. It was ugly. And I'm saying these things because they're true. And so we would stand up and look, and a lot of times, especially the Greek crowd, would be yelling and pointing, and everybody would be sitting like they did nothing, or it was, you don't belong here, you in. And we would just sit there and ignore. And that happened a couple of games. And we had a meeting and said, that's not going to work. Because, back then, we were ready to fight. We weren't afraid to fight. We just wanted to know who to fight. And we decided, this is what I'm talking about being strategic. Instead of being down below the student section, let's go to the game early and get above the student section. And so now we can see the culprit. If you have something to say it to my face, and then let's deal with it. The black girls that didn't want to sit up high, they started bringing umbrellas to protect themselves. But that shouldn't have happened. We were just there to get an education. And that university belonged to all of us, the whole state of Arkansas. We had as much legal right to be there and as much right as students and humans to be there. And we were not going to be run away. So that's where the whole Dixie protest came from. It was more than about Dixie. It was about changing the atmosphere in the stadium and on the campus. So we made the decision to, before we went to the Greek theater to protest, we approached the band director, and I don't remember his name, but he was amenable to doing away with Dixie. But the band did not want to cease to play Dixie. And the administration was supportive of what the students and the alumni wanted, and which to me showed a total lack of moral courage and understanding. And when we couldn't come to some agreement, we decided to disrupt the pep rally. We specifically chose the week of the big shootout because we knew two things. The Secret Service was already on campus, and we had seen the safeguards they were taking. The national press was already on campus because President Nixon was coming, and this was a 1-2 matchup in the polls, which ABC had planned, moved the game from early in the season to the end of the season. So we knew exactly what we were doing. And I'm saying this because sometimes in protesting back in the 60s was always planned. Nonviolent protests had a purpose. They trained people to protest nonviolently. And they had a strategy. They had a message, they had a mission. So as Black students, we knew we were only a handful of students. And if there was a riot, we were going to be decimated. But we knew the university would never allow that to happen with the national press, because we had seen from the 60s how the country reacted to the abuse of civil rights workers. It changed the game. So we knew with cameras there, reporters there, the president there, that Arkansas was overbearing. And we had these discussions in our meetings. We also counted on that to protect our physical bodies. And I don't know that anybody has ever talked about these things publicly, but again, these things were strategic. So we went into Greek theater. We stopped the band from coming in. They shut off the mic. They wouldn't let president of BAD speak. So we stayed on the stage so they couldn't conduct the pep rally. And they moved it. We had other protests where we sat in the chancellor's office. Even when I got to law school, we boycotted law school over what we thought was unfair treatment from certain professors. So there were those things. But the majority of my time at the university, I was a college student. I was there to get an education. I made a ton of friends. And I mean this. I made lifelong friends who happen to be white. We stay in touch to this day. Our families are friends. We vacation together. We visit. We keep up with what's going on in each other's lives. And there were a group of us that for 40 years, we got together on the same weekend every year at a set location. And others that, again, we travel, we vacation together. So I made some great friends there. And of course, virtually all of the Black students there, we hung together because we had to. We liked each other, we respected each other. And from that grew the Black Alumni Association, which Lonnie gives me credit for the suggestion, but as I've said, Black Alumni Association grew out of our informal get-togethers, but we needed a voice to raise issues with the university, an official voice. And so Lonnie and Wendell Griffin and Randall Ferguson, and I call those names because Randall, Wendell, and I stayed engaged with the university, served on committees, and did other things. And we pushed the university to hire a director of diversity because we were always off doing our own thing. And the university's response to diversifying its faculty and staff was very slow. You know, the proverbial molasses uphill in the wintertime. And they talked a good game, but they weren't moving. And finally, we got some movement. And why I'm talking about that is the University of Arkansas. I am an American citizen. I'm a citizen of Arkansas. I don't have to justify that. I don't have to qualify that. And neither does anyone else, black or white, Hispanic or whatever. But when you go into a university, and clearly I support the university, but when I go and I walk into a room and you're introducing me to the administrative staff, and there's nobody in that room of color, your message to me is there's nobody black qualified to hold these positions. And that's the message you're sending to students. And I'm trying to get to these questions, and so I'm headed to one of the questions. It's important for black students to interact with black faculty and staff. It's important for white students to interact with black faculty and staff because we all occupy this country, this state, this globe, and you know one particular race. That's what white supremacy is. You hold all of the decision making, all of the authority in your hands to the exclusion of everybody else. It makes everybody subject to you, whether you are reasonable, fair, right, intelligent, or not. And that can't work. And everybody's perspective has to at least be put on the table. We all learn from each other. It strengthens us. I don't think there's any question about that. So the first question sent to me on the list from the students was, have your opinions about the system administration, university administration, and athletic administration changed at all since you were interviewed back in 2007? My answer to that is there's been some improvement administratively. And I'm not talking about specific percentages, but improvement to me is that there is a level playing field, the opportunity for a black person or Hispanic person or woman or anybody else to seek a job, but in particular a black person, and to have a fair opportunity to be hired, and the university make affirmative steps to ensure that there is not just inclusion, but diversity. I am extremely disappointed with the athletic department, specifically the athletic administration. And here's why. Back in the 90s, I had multiple conversations with Frank, Coach Broyles, about integration of diversifying the athletic administration. And honestly, he was trying to understand where we were coming from beyond just we need somebody black. We talked about it. And he and I had these conversations where I said, don't just hire a black person and give them a staff, put them out front. You got a receptionist. You give them a title, a salary, but you give them no authority. They cannot make decisions. They have no control over resources, personnel, assets. That's window dressing. And nobody respects that. Not the staff, not the black people they're coming in contact with. So Frank asked me, he said, well, Gene, where am I going to find this person? Said, Frank, you've been recruiting all your life. You recruit athletes, you recruit coaches, you recruit athletic staff. Where do you find them? And I think we came to a meeting of the minds, and I'm taking no credit for it, but it was after those meetings shortly that he introduced Derek Gray. And my point is, and I think Derek did a wonderful job there, and now is Vice President of Equity, recently hired by the NCAA after having been athletic director at Eastern Michigan and then Tulsa for up until recently. And I'm not going to get into name calling, but if you check, subsequent to that, there were other black, more than one, there were other black associate or senior associate athletic directors who those guys are now at other Power 5 conference schools working. I believe one is at Baylor, one is at Iowa State, one is with the SEC Central Office, and one is at University of Central Florida. And there may be others I'm aware of. And of course, Derek is with the NCAA. 2020. There are 16 white males employed in male athletics at the University of Arkansas. Athletic director, 3 deputy athletic directors, 2 senior associate athletic directors, 4 associate athletic directors, 4 assistant athletic directors, 2 directors. That's the lowest level. There's 1 black director. So there are 16 white males and 1 black at the lowest level. That's unacceptable. Hunter Yurchek. That's unacceptable. Chancellor Steinmetz. That's unacceptable, Board of Trustees. If the University of Arkansas were to put an all-white basketball team on the floor or an all-white football team on the field, fans would be up in arms. They would be upset. That wouldn't look right. And yet, it looks right to me, from my vantage point, to Hunter Yurchek, and I'm calling his name because he's the guy in the seat. It looks right to Steinmetz to me because he's the guy in the seat. And it looks right to the board because they're overseeing this. I'm 69 years old. I had these conversations 20-something years ago. We had conversations, so you'll know, this wasn't. Frank and I had conversations about 20-something years ago. There were 2 black, I believe, in the Razorback Hall of Honor. Sidney Moncrief And Ray, last name was Ray, the baseball player. I said, Frank, this is not me complaining. Go look. That wall looks like the country club in South Arkansas. No blacks. All of the great black players that attended the university and played, where are they? And to his credit, he said, Gene, give me some time. And the reason I'm saying this, I'm not planning on his name, but he would send me these handwritten notes. I'm going to take a look at that, enjoyed the visit. I'll be in touch. He always followed up. And they changed some things so that that's not the situation now. So all of these things are doable if somebody addresses them. And to me, there's no excuse for having 16 white males when 65, every year, 65, 70% of your football team is black. 90% or more of your basketball team is black. But you never bring back former Razorback players. Never. That is unacceptable. And somebody asked me, well, how can you still? If you drop out of the process, nothing can change. That's why I stay engaged. And so they gave me a lot of questions, but that's one in particular I wanted to address. And I congratulate Charles on being named provost, having the interim taken off. But the whole university system needs to look at how it operates so that there's a level playing field of opportunity. And there should be no door that's closed or foreclosed. And we protested over everything from with Dean Denman, who was very helpful. There were administrators in there who were very helpful and listened. Because every year there were no black Razorback beauties, no blacks on the homecoming court. So it looked like, oh, black women aren't beautiful. No, we address those things. And we address those things with the Dean of Student Affairs. We address those things with Frank Broyles. And we got movement. We shouldn't have to address those things in 2020. And the last time I was there at a basketball game, I looked at the cheerleading squad, and I believe it was cheerleading squad. And I think we can do better. So I'm not just interested in sports, but faculty, staff. There has to be opportunity. There has to be inclusion. And you can't just, in this day and time, there are more black people qualified to do more things than ever before. And I know the competition for those that are highly qualified is stiff. But we pay for everything else we want. So I don't know what the problem is. And I know they're not, I know what it costs to buy Razorback football tickets where I sit. I know what the contribution levels are. I know what it takes to travel. And I don't mind. I'm not one of these giant contributors. That's not what I'm saying. But we pay for what we want to pay for, all of us. And the university cannot say it can't compete for top black talent. It just can't say that. With that, I didn't cover certain subjects, but I know what the time is. So if anybody has a question they want to ask, I'm open.
May I ask a question, Councilor McKissic? So
Please just call me Gene.
Okay. So have you seen the like protests that are happening on campus and the Black students that are trying to um, unite as well and see some differences at the University of Arkansas?
I have not paid much attention to it. Um,
My my big question is, did you, when BAD was popular on campus, did you all ever have any internal differences?
yes.
And how did you quell those?
Um, internal differences are good. It means you are debating. And so we would have very heated meetings, very heated, because in that group you have those people who are accommodationists, you have those people who are uh, from the Black Panther School of Thought, we had those people who were fearful, and then you have those people who are, let's be strategic in what we do. Let's look at our goals and purpose. And so we would just um, almost always we came to a group consensus. If you don't support it, don't fight it. But when we walk out of this room, this is our position. And that's been the same thing that we have done in the past when we started Black Alumni Association. You must have debate because no one person or one group, even within the Black community, knows it all, has all of the right ideas. So don't be this idea that Black people fighting with each other. We're not fighting with each other. We're discussing different ideas. That's how you grow. And that's how you keep from making, if the person who has the floor has, has dumb ideas, you don't want to follow that. That's the blind leading the blind. And I don't follow anybody knowingly that's blind. So don't do that. What I will tell you is though, don't protest just to be protesting. Have a target, make that target valuable. That's going to create change and make a demand in the appropriate way at the appropriate time to the appropriate people. And that's something that I've always tried to do. A lot of things we did trying to change things, they weren't out in the public. Matter of fact, people didn't even know they were going on when a lot of time when Wendell, Randall, and I, Lonnie, we were doing things. It wasn't about publicity. We were trying to create change within the university. When we went public is when the university was deaf and dumb. So
Thank
I
you so
hope that
much.
answers your question.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
I would love to come to one of y'all's meetings just to see what the difference is, not to try to be a guiding light, just to make the comparisons. Any more questions?
Dr. McKissic, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Um, at the time during BAD, did the group of Black students expect to make as much of an impact as they did at the time, or were you just thinking about fixing the issues that were already there at the moment?
We had issues that right then that were pressing. I mean, they may seem trivial, but when people look at them now, but we couldn't go buy a hair product. You couldn't hear soul music. I mean, you were just totally isolated. And that's one of the reasons, and Gary McDonald laid a lot of the foundation, and I completed it when we, for the university's radio station. But one of the primary purposes of it was not only to have it, to give students a voice, but so we could hear something besides country music. And I like country music, but soul music is what I was raised on. So it was everywhere you went. There was nobody black on campus, not even a janitor, not even a cook. And it's hard for you to have perspective of yourself that's, well, let me say this. I never had a negative perspective of myself, but you knew that this was not a nurturing environment. So we were intending right then to have an impact to create change. And we knew if all we did was go to class and get degrees, the assumption would be we were satisfied. And the times were that black people were speaking up, and we were not. Again, being silent just wasn't an option. As you know, I believe it. You know, a king who said, "Silence is betrayal." It's a famous quote, and I believe King said it. Martin Luther King. You're betraying yourself. But silence is acquiescence. So no, we intended to have an impact. That's why we boycotted. That's why we demonstrated. That's why we protested. If, okay, I quoted the wrong one. They said that was Norzil Hurston, I guess, who said that. Thank you, whoever sent that to me. But there's no point in you protesting if you don't intend to effectuate change. Next question.
I have one. Being a black Republican, did you ever get did you ever get backlash from other black students while you were at U of A? If so, how did you deal with it? Because that can hurt a lot.
Well, not at the Republican Democrat wasn't a big thing on campus. And I did that more after I left. I have real struggles, especially over the last few years. I don't always support, I support country and candidates over party. Let me make that very clear. Yeah, I've gotten some pushback being a black attorney and being a Republican. But you cannot have all your eggs in one basket. And you can't, if I was gonna wilt every time I got pushback, I mean, you're at the university where you're a very small minority. When I first got to South Arkansas, there were no black judges, period. Very few black lawyers in 76. And we're trying cases all over the state. The vast majority of juries are predominantly white. So if you're gonna wilt every time the numbers aren't in your favor, or you're in a minority position, you wouldn't do anything. And I've had good relationship. I had good relationship with some of the Republican governors where good things happen that happen as a result of other, not just myself, but other black Republicans having input into decision making, and having an open door to be able to communicate with Governor Huckabee and Governor Hutchinson. And I can tell you, sometimes there were things that we could have gotten done that we didn't get done because sometimes, frankly, you know, black Democrats, they don't get credit for it. They don't want to see it happen. But the short answer to your question is, I'm not enamored with the Democratic Party for the support that the black community has given them. They have produced very little. Anytime you got all your eggs in one basket, that basket drops. What do you have? And philosophically, I believe when it comes down to fiscal responsibility and conservatism, personal response, I believe in a lot in what limited government. It ought to be targeted. But that's one of the reasons I became a Republican. I did not subscribe to a lot of things the Democrats believe in. And most of my friends, black and white, are Democrats. And we have these jokes that
Oh no.
oh yeah, I mean, they call me in, but I own it now. Like I said, I'm a John McCain Republican. I don't mind saying it. I supported both George Bushes. Why did I choose to become a lawyer? Two reasons. My hero, the guy that was a mentor in some way, but the guy, my role model, not hero, was George Howard Jr. And one of the others, there were famous black lawyers from Pine Bluff who were involved in the Central high school crisis case. And I looked up to them very much so. And I wanted to, Wiley Branton. Wiley Branton lived just around the corner from my grandmother. He was an usher at the family church. And we stayed friends throughout his lifetime. And Wiley Branton, you may not know, but those were two of the first two black law students called the Pioneers. They were among the first 6, 7 black law students and students to attend the university. And I knew both of them. And throughout their lifetime, you know, I don't hold myself up to their standard, wish I could. They were just great gentlemen and great lawyers. And so they were great role models for me. And I wanted to be what they were. So that's the answer though. And their commitment was to serving at that time primarily the black community, because the legal business, law practice of law was very largely segregated as far as black lawyers. It's not now, but it was then. And I wanted to come back to Pine Bluff and represent people who didn't have a voice. By the way, I respect, I did. But I thought it was a question. I wanted to come back and represent. And that's what I've done for the last 40-something years. Try to be a servant or represent people with a servant attitude and make a difference. Because still in South Arkansas, we don't have black lawyers. I mean, you can go south to Pine Bluff, and there really I don't think there's a single black lawyer practicing in South Arkansas. Most of the black lawyers are in East Arkansas, Little Rock, and few in Northwest, Pine Bluff, and there may be one or two in Southwest. But you get in South Arkansas, and the practice of law is still segregated. So, you know, we need some young, bright minds to head that direction, because it makes a difference. It makes a tremendous difference when you walk in the courtroom and when you competently represent your client. In the same way, I'll show you, violence against black people by police in South Arkansas was rampant when I came back in 1976. Whipping black suspects or people on the arrest was common. It was an everyday thing. But once they integrated police forces, it started to dissipate. So your mere presence makes a difference. Having black lawyers changes what goes on in the courtroom. So it's important. Any more questions?
Can I ask just one more before you go?
Sure, I'm here till you guys tell me you're done.
How do you think we can change the environment in Pine Bluff? I'm from Pine Bluff, and I know a lot of the things that happen with gun violence among youth. I don't think a lot of the times we listen to our elders. What do you think we could do?
You asked, so I've been, a lot of problems in Pine Bluff have to be fixed by the black community. They have to be fixed starting with too much insane philosophies about lifestyles. Parents raise children. And in the 70s and going into the 80s and 90s, you know, we have too much of this crazy talk about, I don't need no man, I don't need no husband, I can do bad all by myself. And that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's the real problem in Pine Bluff. It's not the system to me. It's twofold. Parents aren't doing their jobs. They're not serious about it, and that bleeds over into the schools. It bleeds over into the schools because there's not the parental support, there's not the strong PTA, and there's not the strong support for the school administration that was there that I grew up in. We had very strong support, very good discipline. They didn't have any resource officers on the campus when I was at all black school. Didn't even have a assistant principal. So that's at the base of it. And that gets back to male-female relationships before we get to the kids. We have to learn to get along and raise our kids together. Secondly, and I know people, UAPB has to stop being a plantation because a lot of the leadership in this town graduated from UAPB and they still have plantation mentality because UAPB has too often accepted being subject to white authority in this town. Now, I know it's not popular to say, but that mindset exists even when we have black leadership in places in Pine Bluff. They don't have to be shown the back door. They go to it. And they, when we elected Carl Reed as mayor here, that's the one thing we didn't do. But the white power structure was successful in convincing a lot of the black community that we would get along better and have more if there wasn't disagreement between what they call the Readers Group and downtown. I'm not mad about his ultimate defeat. That's politics. But the leadership in Pine Bluff, black leadership in right now, has capitulated, period. And you can't influence kids when all they look and see is impotent leadership. Where are the people who stand up? And I'm not just talking about the civil rights movement wasn't just about black. It was about what is right, what is just. And you have to, what happened to me in Fayetteville and what happened to most of us, if you look at a lot of the U of A graduates, they're much more independent than people who graduated from some other schools. It is because we were exposed to think for yourself. stand for yourself. We heard all that when there were predominantly black schools, and then it left. But I really got a grasp of it as I grew. So you from Pine Bluff? I'm critical of them, and I have been for years, because, again, I don't think they stand, and I'm not talking about just being against. I don't think they're strategic in how they plan and what they do. And so we can't change. We can't change. And this goes back to what you asked me the question about conflict. We must have conflict before we can have conciliation. We have to flesh ideas out. And this idea, if we just be quiet, if we just don't make the white community mad in Pine Bluff, then everything's okay. That's the silence, which is betrayal. I think I saw one other hand. Any more questions? If not, Dr. Robinson, I'm at your disposal.
Thank you, Gene. Really enjoyed that, really learned from that. Appreciate your careful and thorough discussion of your experience and also your thoughts on very, very important matters. And really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk with the students, and very valuable. So thanks a lot.
Well, I will offer this disclaimer. Nobody gave me anything except the topic. I take responsibility for everything I said. I don't have any regrets about it, but these are my thoughts.
Yes, sir. That's what we wanted to hear.
Okay.
And we appreciate you taking the time.
Anytime.
Okay, take care.
Okay.
Thank you, students. And
Thank you.
Katie, thanks a lot. Okay, take care.
Bye-bye. Mhm.